All right, y'all. Welcome back. Last 2 days of the Old Testament before we move on. I guess, not trying to withhold the truth from you. We will do one slide on the Old Testament to start our next unit, Unit 16. That'll kind of recap all the stuff we've been talking about. But this really is the last 2 days of our Old Testament specific studies before we move on for the rest of the year. And today, as promised, we will talk about Judas Maccabeus, who leads the Maccabean revolt against, you could say, the Hellenized Greek culture of the time. So, who is Judas Maccabeus? Well, he's the most talented soldier in the Maccabeus family. Funny how last names work. And the Maccabees, what they do is they are the faithful ones, and they lead a successful revolt against, and you're going to have to help me here, Antiochus, and gained independence. Gained an independent Israel. We're not going to go into a lot of details about the battle because that's pretty much the entirety of the book. I'll put the link to a summary in the lecture notes, but that's basically the entire two books of the Maccabees. Is one Maccabees and two Maccabees is their revolt, their military conquest to win an independent Israel. So, Mr. Flores, why are we skipping so quickly through what seems to be the most important parts of the entire book? Well, this slide alone gives you a good understanding of the book itself. Judas Maccabeus leads a revolt, they win independence. Pretty easy, right? You wish American history could be that easy. The main thing, though, that we're going to take away from the book of Maccabees is not necessarily the successful revolt, but Maccabees as a source for our understanding of purgatory, even within Jewish culture. So today and tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit about purgatory, what it is, what do Catholics believe about purgatory, and the roots of our understanding of purgatory, which are found even here in the Old Testament, which you might find kind of interesting, right? I've got a book back in the campus ministry office that talks about the Jewish understanding of the resurrection. We often think of the resurrection as only a Christian Catholic understanding of things, but the Jewish people had a very detailed understanding of the afterlife. And part of it we find in the book of Maccabees. Now, I will warn you, if you just pick up any Bible, you are not always going to find the book of Maccabees. In fact, almost all Protestant Bibles do not include the book of Maccabees as a book proper to the Bible. So they may put it in the back section. They may not include it at all. But the Catholic Bible contains the book of Maccabees as Holy Scripture, and therefore we find in it evidence for purgatory. The biggest one is the fact that Judas Maccabeus prays for the souls of his dead soldiers after their death. If there's, you can put it this way, right? If you go straight to hell and there's nothing you can do about it, it doesn't really mean anything to pray for them. And if they're in heaven, well, they're in heaven, and so that you don't really need to pray for them in that way. You can maybe pray to them, right? But if they're someplace else, well, then maybe it makes sense to pray for them. So let's read the quote together and see how purgatory makes sense within the context of the Maccabean story. So this is from the second book of Maccabees. In doing this, he acted very well and honorably, taking account of the resurrection. For if he were not expecting that those who had fallen would rise again, it would have been superfluous and foolish to pray for the dead. But if he was looking to the splendid reward that is laid up for those who fall asleep in godliness, it was a holy and pious thought. Therefore he made atonement for the dead, that they might be delivered from their sin. In that we find pretty much the basic understanding of what purgatory is. And so I'll give you a brief rundown today, and then tomorrow we'll go into a little bit more detail about what purgatory is, especially in context of the three places that you could go when you die, right? Heaven, hell, and purgatory. But if you look back at this quote, so just going to put it on the board for a second, I'll go back to the next slide. If you look at this quote, what you see here, especially, therefore he made atonement for the dead, that they might be delivered from their sin. Chances are, when we die, when we all die, we all will, We're not going to die as perfect people, right? It's almost impossible to die as a perfect person. We'll have some kind of sins on our soul. Hopefully not mortal sins, but maybe we had a few venial sins here or there, and even if we had committed mortal sins or venial sins, there's still kind of the scar of sin that remains. And so it makes sense, and this is, I guess I should move to the next slide here, but before I do, what what the book of Maccabeus is explaining here is that in atonement for those sins, the sins of the dead, the people that are still alive made a prayer for them to seek that forgiveness for them, so that they, where is it here? So that they may experience the joys of that resurrection. So what is purgatory then? Well, the Catholic understanding of purgatory is that it's a state of purification, right? To purge something, not like the movie, but to purge out of you the scars and the sins that remain in your soul after you're dead. The best explanation, or I shouldn't say the best, an explanation that helped me a lot when I was in high school was this one about a car and bringing it into a garage before or at the time of your death. But basically it goes like this, right? If your parents, and a lot of you guys are going to start learning to drive pretty soon. So if your parents came to you and said, all right, I'm going to give you a brand new car, no strings attached, you're never going to have to pay for it, you get it completely free, don't even worry about insurance, I'll cover that as well, I'll cover your gas money and everything. Sounds like a pretty good deal. They say the only condition is that at some point I'm going to ask you to return this car, and I want you to return it in the same condition that I gave it to you, brand new. And you're like, oh yeah, that sounds great, awesome, here I go. And and anyone who's ever driven a car, so you probably look at your family car, it's almost impossible to drive a car, even if you're careful, without getting some kind of ding or scratch. Something breaks in the car, right? You go on a long road trip, it's bound to happen. And so when you get that call that says, all right, it's time to return the car, you look at your car and you're like, well, this is not brand new. This is not even close to brand new. So what do? You take it to a garage, you take it to a shop, and they buff out the scratches, right? They fix the problem. So here you've got a picture of, an auto shop, an auto repair shop, where they're going to fix a car that has been broken. So you go to that shop, you fix up the car, you buff out the scratches, and then you return it back and say, here it is. It's brand new again. Now, obviously it's not completely brand new. There's miles on it. But the point is that you need to go through some kind of period, some kind of process to get that car back in the shape that is proper to the deal that was made. You can kind of think of purgatory like that, is that God gives you this body and soul for the entirety of your life and says, this is yours to do with it what you will, kind of to do with it what he wills as well. But my only condition, right, is that you bring me back this body and soul when I call you back in the condition that I gave it to you in. In other words, sinless, right? Obviously, you will have grown. Hopefully, you will have done the very thing, the vocation to which you were called, right? But that sinlessness, even though I know we're talking about original sin, it's just an analogy, okay? Well, then it makes sense that you would have to go through some kind of period of purification before you bring it back to God. Or think of it another way, right? If heaven is a place of pure perfection, of pure joy, happiness, and love, no trace, no small amount of sin can enter into heaven. Not even the littlest bit, right? We can't cling to even just the littlest bit. And we have to get rid of it before we can go to heaven. Or to think of another way, right? If you were to go into, if you were a surgeon going into surgery, or I remember when my daughter was born, she had to be in the neonatal intensive care unit. So it's called the NICU, and it's where some of the babies that aren't quite fully healthy, they go to try to recover, and so it's really on lockdown. And so to get into the NICU, you've got to make sure you're completely sterile when you go in there. So you got to even you wash your phone, you wash your hands. They won't let you in until you do all that stuff. Well, it makes sense, right? You got to get all that dirt off before you go into a place where dirt can't be. Heaven is a place where sin can't be, and so you've got to get all that off before you can enter. And that's what purgatory is. It's the place that purifies you from the effects and scars of sins. And it's only temporary. So if you make it to purgatory, you are going to get out. So that's why I have a picture of the waiting room. Waiting rooms are the worst because you're in the large waiting room. This is from Seinfeld, the large waiting room, and then they take you into the tiny waiting room, and then finally at some point the doctor comes in. But you know that once you're in the waiting room, you will be seen. You don't know when always. You don't know how long it's going to take, and it can feel like hours and days sometimes. It depends on the doctor you're going to. Uh, but you're going to be seen by the doctor. If you make it to purgatory, you are going to be seen by the Lord, right? You're going to make it into heaven. But how long that period is, I don't know, and it's dependent upon a number of things. The amount of sins that you've committed in your life, how much dirt you have in your soul, how many dings and scratches on the car that you've accumulated over that time that need to be gotten rid of before you can enter into heaven. And even if your sins have been forgiven, right, the effects of those sins might still remain. So you can think of like a guy that has done nothing but sin his entire life, but has this conversion at the end of his life. Well, that conversion counts, right? That forgiveness is there, and he's going to make it into heaven. But he's got a lot of work to do in the soul to be able to see or to understand what heaven would be like. And so purgatory for him is going to be about retraining the soul to be able to experience heaven. Or another way to think of it, if you've not used your muscles in a long time, right, they start to atrophy, right? Especially like patients that are recovering from different surgeries, where they haven't even moved their arm for a long time. You need to be recapacitated to use those capacities before you can get back to your normal life. If you've not used the muscles of your soul, right, of being able to love or something like that for very long, you'll need to be retrained in how to do that so you can go to a place that is nothing but love, right, which is heaven. Now, what about prayer? So we saw with Judas Maccabeus that prayer is a big thing. And that's where the Catholic belief of praying for the dead comes into it, is that we can pray for the souls in purgatory to help them get out of purgatory. And that is a great, as it says here, a holy and pious thing to do, to offer up prayers and sacrifices in this life for those who have gone before us so that they might get into God, to be with God in the next life. And again, just remember that it's only temporary, that you will leave purgatory and go to heaven. There's no going back, right? So if you're in purgatory, you're going to go to heaven, just not yet, but soon. Pretty much all of us are going to go to purgatory. Or I should say this. My hope is that pretty much all of us are going to go to purgatory, and that way we'll get into heaven. Maybe some of us will go someplace else. Maybe some of us will be such good saints, right, like the holy martyrs, that they'll go straight into heaven. But chances are, a lot of us are going to go to purgatory. But that doesn't mean that you're going to ever get sent to hell. It's not like it's not a period of trial and testing, right? It's a period of purification so that you can be ready to enter into a place of perfection. Okay. Tomorrow we will talk a lot more about heaven, hell, and purgatory, the relationship of those three. But for right now, I just want to let you see this connection of how a theological concept like purgatory is found even in the Old Testament, that we didn't just make up this stuff. There's other cases in Maccabees, but we're only going to refer to for this one right now. All right, so that's it for today. Make sure you answer the study questions, and I will see you guys tomorrow for our last notes on the Old Testament. All right, guys, take it easy. I'll see you in the next one.